Hi guys, welcome back to Abundance of Lovely. Abundance is filled to overflowing and lovely is what we are filled with, and that is love. I'm going to take you through my 2025 reads. I'm going to take you through some statistics to begin with and star ratings for the books. I'll do a genre overview as well. I feel like the difference between a lot of the booktubers that I see versus my repertoire of books is genre. I have a very unique genre that I read and I love that, and I am looking for others who love these types of books as well, and I hope there are others out there, and I'm sure there are. Now, in terms of the 22 books, I didn't own all of them. I only owned a small portion of these books, as you can see here. So I'll be able to hold up the physical for a few. The remainder were on my e-device, so that's either the Cloud Library or the Kindle Library, and the Cloud Library is the local library, so I sometimes will go and borrow the books physically, or I can also borrow them virtually. It's all about when they're available online. Without further ado, let's start. I'm going to take you through the statistics first. So I read 22 books. That is 7,469 words approximately. I say approximately because I have noticed that GoodReads sometimes has varying page numbers than the physical page numbers that I see. So I take it with a grain of salt, but around 7.5k pages. In terms of the star ratings, of the 22 books, I gave 7 of them 5 stars, which is actually quite high. I was obviously having a really good year and enjoying the books that I was reading. I gave 10 of them 4 stars, again, very generous. 3 of them 3 stars, and 2 of them 2 stars. So you can see a bit of a range there. I will note that because I do this on GoodReads, GoodReads doesn't allow you to do half increments. So I think I would have seen a bit more of a clarity and a spread in the star ratings if I had done the half increments, because some of them are definitely 4.5, some of them are 3.5s rather than 4s, etc. But I've always rounded up usually. Now to the fun part, the genre overview. This is what is very unique about my reading style. I love Christian non-fiction of any kind. So that's memoirs or autobiographies, biographies, or historical fiction. In my brain, I think historical fiction is like a non-fiction, so I think that in my head I've always imagined my ratio being higher in the non-fiction category over the fiction category. So I was pleasantly surprised when I did the stats and I realized that 13 of my books were fiction and 9 of them were non-fiction. And I did a breakdown further than just this, but that's super interesting. But I think that's particularly interesting because that is a higher ratio, I would assume, than most when it comes to non-fiction, and I just absolutely love non-fiction. The thing about non-fiction is that they do come in different shapes and forms, and what I mean by that is that some of them are easier to read than others. Some of the ones that are very self-helpy can be just digestible straight away, they're very easy reads, or they can be really complex reads that take you like many months, many years even to read, because you just pick it up a chapter at a time or even a page at a time, and then you have to go and walk away and digest it for forever. So nonfiction can kind of go on either end of that spectrum. I'm not sure how many people do this, but I usually read multiple books on the go. I will have my fiction, which is usually an easier, lighter read. I'll have usually 2 non-fictions on the go, and those are usually Christian non-fictions or self-help non-fiction books. And the reason they'll be usually on the go is that I'm not always in the mood to read those, but I always like to have them on hand. By the end of the year, I usually try to finish all of the ones that I did have on the go at any one point in time, even though it might have taken me many months to finish them. So if we break down the 13 fiction, 4 of those are historical fiction, 3 of those are crime fiction / mystery thriller genre, but I put them under crime fiction for the purpose of this. 3 of them are contemporary fiction, which basically just means it's set in modern day times. Christian fiction, which is, as it seems, it's just a very Christian-esque narrative, but it is fictional. Some would argue that that one, though, is interestingly enough, is historical fiction. I think I agree with Christian fiction for that one rather than historical fiction, but maybe in the future it would be a historical fiction. One of them was literary fiction, which, as a contrast to contemporary fiction, it isn't necessarily set in modern day times, but it does explore the rich inner life of its characters. And then last but not least in the fiction category was speculative fiction. I honestly had no idea that this book that I read was speculative fiction, but it does make sense. It was very philosophical and very abstract and I liked that. It was a very easy read for me. Then when we look at the 9 non-fiction books that I had 5 which were Christian non-fiction, which is not surprising to me at all. Then I had 2 which were classified as memoirs or autobiographies. 1 that was a biography. I would say that this one's an interesting one though, because it wasn't one person's biography, it was a journalistic account of multiple people's life events. So holistically, it actually is many biographies rather than just one person's biography. And then last but not least is the self-help category. I put 2 there, but technically if we took 2 from the Christian nonfiction category, I also would classify those as self-help Christian nonfictions. So technically there's 4 that are self-help. And then within that 9, 2 of them, interestingly enough, were written by journalists, which I just found a fun fact. I find that journalists have a very particular style. They're very fact-driven, very detail-oriented. Even the crime fiction novels that I read were set with a journalistic context. One of the main characters is a journalist. There was a big theme of journalism environments this year in my reading, which I didn't necessarily intend to be the case. The reason that's fascinating to me is because I actually studied originally to become a journalist, and I swapped. So originally my major was journalism, and then I went to creative writing. That is a story for a different day, but essentially I changed my perspective on what type of writing I wanted to do. And so I admire greatly the journalism profession and the writing style that they adopt, but it's not my personal preference when it does come to my own writing. But then creative writing also helps me to understand how I can read in different genres and different authors and different styles. Now, the thing about my reading style is that it highly influences my writing. So when I was in university studying creative writing, we did a subject called creative reading. And this essentially was all about reading in order to learn different genres, different voices, different writers' styles. And so reading is never a passive action for a writer. When I approach a book, I am observing, I am learning. It is an opportunity for me to enter into another author's world and to see how they have perfected their craft. Sometimes I love what they do, sometimes I don't love what they do, but regardless, I still come away with learnings, and I love that. My professor did tell me that to be a good writer, you do need to be a good reader, and so that is my motto. That is what I have on my GoodReads. That is the mindset that I go into reading with. I want to be a good writer, and so I need to be a good reader, which means challenging myself and not playing it safe with books that I do like. So that means that there needs to be books that I read within a year that are outside of my comfort zone, or that are a new genre or a new approach than I am used to. I'm going to take you through a short summary of each of the books, so this might end up a longer vlog than usual. Feel free to skip to the books that are of interest to you. I will have a photo of them on the screen if I don't have the hard copy to hold up. Before I do jump into the summary of all the novels, I do want to tell you my top book for the year, or I should say top books. I do have a drawer. I have 2 books that I can't choose between as my favorite, and that is The Lost Passenger by Frances Quinn and Rapture by MacGuire. These are both historical fiction, and I absolutely loved both of them. They are very different, and it's too hard to pick between them. I just figured that both of them can be my favorite book for the year. Honorable mentions though do go to Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. Absolutely loved this from a Christian nonfiction perspective, and also The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, honorable mention. That is a crime fiction, so very different, but I loved all of those. Let's get into my summary of all of the books. So in January, I only read 1 book, and that was Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lisa Terkheurst. I did write a quite thorough review for this one, so I will show you that. I said, I enjoyed the journey of healing that this book invites us into. Lisa seeks to educate us on what boundaries are and aren't, when goodbyes may be required, and on how to respectfully navigate the difficult relationships that we might encounter in our lives. Now, I do have a recommendation of who I think this book is most applicable for. I believe it's relevant for those who do have past wounds from broken trust and relationships. I do believe though that this book would hold more weight when you are in the midst of relational function. It wasn't as poignant for me because I have been out of that season now for a little while, but I could see very clearly that this would have been a very powerful resource to have had at the time where I was in relationship breakdowns. As I read this book from that distance of relational trauma, I wasn't able to actively apply the wisdom and practical advice provided. I would highly recommend this to someone who is in that season of relationship turbulence so that they can actually benefit from that application. Like I said, I wasn't able to benefit from it because I'm past that season. So holistically, I still rated this a very valuable resource. At the end of the book, Lisa deconstructs Bible verses that can be weaponized and held against you, which can lead to spiritual manipulation and compromised boundaries. And this was incredible. I love that. I wish that all Christians would be able to read that. I think it's very healthy for us to understand how the Bible can be used for harm, because it's a tendency for us to just only understand how it can be used for good. But there may be instances where we do need to deconstruct them and actually understand the right context so that we don't misapply it and hurt others in the process. Ultimately, I said that Lisa thoughtfully approaches challenging conversations. Throughout the novel, you see the inclusion of her therapist's insights and reflections, which gives a more psychological backing to the contents and the themes that she covers. So I think it's a great resource holistically because you have both the author's experience as well as her therapist's knowledge together. Beautiful combo. The next book I read in February was Tom Lake by Patchett. Now I gave this 3 stars. I did love the writing and I loved the characters. It was very rich characters and inner lives. What I didn't like was how slow it was. It was a very slow burn at the start, but once it did start to kick off, it kicked off and it did have me captivated. And I did like the relationship dynamics that were explored. So that was my only literary fiction for this year. I think I want to read more literary fiction in the future, and that might change my perspective. Maybe I will come to appreciate the slower burn at the start. I think because I hadn't really kicked off the year from a reading perspective, I was looking for something a bit more fast-paced at this point in time. Next we have It Wasn't Meant to Be Like This by Lisa Wilkinson. Now Lisa is a journalist. She's a very well-known journalist in Australia. She was also a TV presenter for many, many years. I actually had the honour of meeting Lisa Wilkinson in my first year of university. This was when I was studying journalism. We did have to go and meet and do interviews with journalists at the time, and she very kindly allowed me to go and meet her and speak with her, which was a real inspiration. So it was very surreal to read her book, but it was an incredible read. I did give it 4 stars. I enjoyed hearing her life, her story. She really goes through all of the different key moments in her life that led to her career and some of the real career challenges and shifts and hurdles that she has faced over all of her time in the spotlight. And Lisa's instance gives us some insights into Australian media as well, so definitely recommend that. Next we have The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Now this was the speculative fiction. I haven't read something of this kind before. Some say that it is fantasy or magic realism as well. I can't speak to that because I don't read enough of magic realism or fantasy to know. Here is my review. I gave it 4 stars. It is an easy read. It is full of a philosophical journey of life and death, choices and regrets. Haig explores the deep questions that govern our potential, our contentment, our perspective on life. It is a really great perspective shifter to help you get out of any life or reading rut. And I mean this wholeheartedly. I had been in a bit of a reading rut at this point in the year, and I feel like this book really inspired and encouraged me again. I think because it really activates the imagination and it applies to life and it makes you question your life. It is a great book for really getting you back into the creative mindset that is required for reading. Next, we have my first 5-star read for the year, which was Rapture by MacGuire. I stumbled across this book. I absolutely loved it. So I discovered this because my library had recommended it under historical fiction. And since I love that genre, I also loved the cover for this book. I ended up just borrowing this novel. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't even realize that it had such Christian themes. So it's technically a historical fiction about Christianity, early Christendom. So I wasn't expecting that, and I was very fascinated because I didn't know that there was this legend of Pope Joan. This is of course very controversial in the church, but this book explores that with real sensitivity and also intrigue. My review says, I was not expecting the intrigue, the masterful authorship of the spiritual realities and historical exploration of early Christendom. If you're interested in a unique historical fiction, don't miss this exploration of purity and identity. It definitely has coming of age tropes and the mysteries of the life of devotion and denial found in monasteries, priest chambers, and papal powers. Like I just said, I hadn't heard of the legend of Pope Joan, but I deeply appreciated the author's compelling fiction around how this myth may have manifested. So she really was imagining the environment that might have created this and allowed this and enabled this to happen. There are so many beautiful quotes in this novel as well. The author truly embodies the Christian walk and presents an ode to contemplative prayer throughout her pages. The main critique I could see from other Christians approaching this novel is how it does explore purity. It isn't perhaps a completely orthodox view of purity in early Christendom, but that said, I haven't read enough of the literature around this time or even the fictional tellings of that time, so I don't know if this was a reality for early Christendom to struggle with purity in monasteries, but I really enjoyed it. And some of the beautiful quotes, let me find it. To know is not to understand. The first moments of sleeping are when the veil between worlds is thinnest, but demons and angels both may come at this time, and which of them brought her the vision she does not know. Whew, how beautiful is that? She wonders how a person might tell the difference between something that is true and something that has merely been repeated so often and for so long that it is carved into men's thinking like a desire path through the forest. Beautiful thought-provoking quotes like that are scattered throughout, and that's what I think really captivated me because I love being thought-provoking in my writing, and so I really appreciate it when others are. There are so many beautiful quotes in that novel, and so I highly recommend if you love historical fiction and if you are interested in a hot take on early Christendom and some of the legends of that time. Next we have a Christian non-fiction / self-help book, which is The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. If you've read any of my blogs this year, you will know that I have highly quoted this in the Performative Spirituality post as well as in the Church Hurt post. This book really resonated with me and my experience, and so that's why I believe it had such a high rating. It might not have a high rating or be as interesting for someone who hasn't gone through church hurt or spiritual abuse of any form. I do believe it is going to be very fascinating of a resource though for anyone who is in the church context, in leadership, in ministry roles, because there is a lot of important takeaways and ground covered in here. My review is very long, but let me summarize some key points from it. So this book is destroying in the best possible way. It helps to reveal parts of my story and experience that I had internalized that were spiritually abusive, which of course I didn't realize at the time. Reading this book has been incredibly healing as I've been discovering and deconstructing line by line, reflecting and relating to my own wounding and seeking a bigger picture in the issue at hand. That is pretty much the key here. It's not looking to condemn or to just complain about spiritual abuse in the church. It really frames it in a way that I think helps the victims to heal, which is important. The descriptions of spiritual systems at play is incredible, it's theologically sound, and it echoed the truth woven throughout the scriptures. I truly wish more people today were aware and informed of the signs of a spiritually abusive system and empowered and equipped to lead with grace. Performative spirituality is a complex topic, and yet the authors so beautifully go deep into the nuances of this topic and the forms of abuse that can occur in performance-based spiritual systems. I will stop there, but definitely recommend if you want to pause and read my review, go ahead. It's a toolkit, I would say. It's a resource. It takes a very methodical approach to it, and it kind of covers all angles that I think need to be covered. So I highly recommend if this is a situation or a context that fascinates you. Next, I have another self-help book. This one isn't a Christian one, but it is a non-fiction one. It is When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress. This is very similar to When the Body Keeps the Score. This one is very helpful in that it uses a whole raft of different illnesses and looks at how trauma in early life and just sustained stress in someone's life can lead to debilitating illnesses. I found all of the case studies really fascinating. Ironically, when I was reading these, I wasn't myself in a state of stress, but after this, I did end up in a season of stress-induced illness. And so I found it very fascinating that I just happened to read this right before that occurred. It's almost like it was a foreshadowing and I didn't realize that it was. But there was a lot of helpful quotes in this book that I ended up sending to friends. I highly recommend this book as something that is a bit more of an in-depth self-help book around stress. Stress is not just about the psychology, but the physiological response, the biological response, and this book really does look at that in many different manifestations and case studies. Something to note though is that it is very dense. It is written by a doctor and it does have a lot of medical language and scientific language, and so it hasn't at all been diluted or watered down into an easy to read self-help book. It is quite complex to read. I just found it fascinating though because it really does explore a lot of the nuances of stress and trauma, particularly when it comes to emotions and emotional development. This was really fascinating to see that emotional repression can actually be an indicator of past sustained stress or trauma. So really fascinating. I had a lot of takeaways personally as well, so highly recommend. Next we have another historical fiction, which is the Mozart Code. Now, I was on a bit of a kick after reading The Rose Code last year. I absolutely loved that novel, gave it 5 stars. It was based on Bletchley Park, and if you've seen the movie The Imitation Game, it's all that same era, same historical context, and I really loved that, and I want to read more books in that space. But I read something slightly different with Mozart Code, where it had the elements of the cryptology or the espionage, but it wasn't the same Bletchley Park context. So my review is an era of espionage in historical fiction that I haven't come across. I loved the slow burn of understanding the characters and the plot. The author somehow manages to entice us with the complexity of politics, churches, music, and places. Mozart is a springboard for a rich exploration of concepts, and the author brings poetry and purpose to this historical niche. Mozart is interestingly involved in this, and if you do love music, you might find this a really fascinating element of the book. The intrigue comes through the strongest in our male and female main characters who dance around secrets, pasts, and romance. Despite the frustration at our main characters' inability to express themselves, there was a familiarity to these very protective behaviours. The fear of vulnerability only served to reveal the true power of love in our humanity. It's the decision that every heart needs to make, whether to trust another heart and to allow their love to break through any barriers, defiance, and fear. This was why I ended up giving it higher stars. I did find it not as easy a read as The Rose Code or similar historical fictions, but what I think really brought me in was the human element of the secrecy and the conversations and the concepts explored. And I do think I just really appreciated that there was that subtle hinting at the need to trust, especially when there is secrecy or espionage at play. Next, we have the only Christian fiction that I read this year, and that is Francine Rivers. I absolutely love Francine Rivers. One of my favorite books ever is written by her, which is Redeeming Love. But I read And the Shofar Blue, which was something different. It was Christian fiction. I didn't really expect the narrative. When I went in there, I had no idea what to expect, but I found it really fascinating because it depicted the mega church pastor who started off humble in a small church and then ended up in a mega church where he was tainted, and his faith and his morals and ethics, everything just fell on the wayside a little bit. It was a very interesting handling of that, and I haven't really seen it explored in fiction before, and so I appreciate what Rivers was doing. It's very real, it's very believable, and I really love the characters and the exploration in this. I think what I really didn't like, I know that Rivers had to do this, but she really pushed the pastor into a sinful situation that I really didn't like. It was adultery, and it was really complex, the emotions that she led us to have, because in the end I was actually rooting for the new believer and the wife to be together, which isn't necessarily what I think Rivers was intending, but it's definitely how we walked away from the novel, because we didn't really like the pastor. We didn't like how he was behaving. We didn't like where he ended up. I don't know, a part of me just didn't like him because of what had happened. And so it was just very great character building because I was very invested in those characters and I either really loved them or I really hated them. So the next 3 books I do need to cluster together because of the author. Kristin has been one of my favourite authors for the last couple of years. I absolutely adore her historical fiction works. So The Nightingale It is actually on the bookshelf behind me. That is one of my favourite novels. She also did The Women and a few other novels that I absolutely loved and have read in previous years. So this year I was forced to go back into some of her earlier work. So some of these titles might not be familiar, but I read Another Life, The Night Road, and Summer Island. These were all not historical fiction, which did initially surprise me because I had typed her as a historical fiction author, but I realised that she actually writes more women fiction and explores domestic issues, but from different angles, and she might use historical context for that exploration, but I realised that she leans way more to being interested in women's issues rather than the historical context. So these three novels were interesting. I gave 4 stars to Summer Island and Night Road and 5 stars to Another Life. Another Life I really loved because it explored those concepts of found family, and I think it was just a nice read and I really resonated with it. Night Road, I found this one very predictable. Before I'd even read, I think, a chapter, I already knew what was going to happen. And I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. It's a good thing if you just want an easy read that is very predictable, you know what's going to happen. But I guess it's a bad thing if you want to be mentally stimulated. I still enjoyed it. I still thought it, in the second half particularly, took a completely different turn than what I was expecting. And so I think she introduced that element of surprise in that respect. But the first half and the setup, it all was very much foreshadowed and we knew what was going to happen before it happened. So I gave it 4 stars, probably for more of that reason. Summer Island again was really beautiful. It did have some complex themes. When I was reading all 3 of these, I don't know if it's because of the proximity in which I was reading them, but I felt like the environments the characters were in were the same. It's almost like they were all in different orbits, but different characters were existing and doing different things at the same time. They weren't necessarily the same places, but they did seem to be within the same like city or locality area in my brain. I don't know if that's just me imagining that or if others experience that, but I definitely did notice that. I will just say holistically, I love Kristin Hannah, but I definitely think I prefer when she does explore her complex women domestic issues in historical context. Because I do love historical fiction, I am definitely way more inclined to read the historical fictions. It's not like I don't like the contemporary fictions, but I can appreciate the research that's gone into historical fictions. And the historical environment and context is usually a bit more fascinating for me, in addition to what is being explored through our characters, if that makes sense. The next book is the first one I have in person, so Any Ordinary Day by Leigh Sales. This was another one of the journalistic accounts, and it's a biography that includes many different tales pulled together. Leigh Sales herself is a journalist, and she is on an exploration to try and find people who have faced unimaginable situations and challenges and heartaches and brokenness and how they've overcome it. It's definitely a book about the resilience of humanity and what enables us to overcome really hard situations. It did win the Walkley Book Award and it's a national bestseller. The main trigger warning I will give is that it's very heavy. Some of the people's case studies that are included aren't easy to digest. This sort of serves the purpose of the exploration and just the miracle that it is that these people are able to have a life despite tragedy. But I just want to flag that because I was reading this at the same time as someone else who had to stop reading because of how it really got them down. It was really not a enjoyable read. It is a very harrowing read, and so you do need to be probably in a good mental space to be able to handle it. So just a trigger warning on that front. And that is probably why I gave it 4 stars as opposed to 5 stars, is I don't think it's for everybody and you do need to apply wisdom with approaching it. The next book is another self-help book and a 5-star. It is the SD Protocol, so the Sympathetic Dominance Protocol. This was a book that I was able to borrow from my chiropractor. He lent it to me. He saw the signs of sympathetic dominance in me, and so I really appreciated that. It was a 5-star read because of how relevant it was for me. And I think this is just a general rule of thumb. Usually books will get higher ratings when they do resonate more with you. Of course, if I'd read this same book in a different season, it might not have resonated as much and I might not have given it as higher rating. My review just reveals how relevant it was. This book really was about implementing a protocol, so it's very practical. It's about the steps that you need to take to get out of sympathetic dominance and getting into a parasympathetic state. This is why I found it really, really valuable, because I did start implementing some of the practical elements of this and started to notice a reprieve in my migraine symptoms. Highly recommend if you notice any tension or stress in your body, or if you suspect that you might be in fight or flight mode, which means you're very reactive to events, I would recommend it. Next we get to one of my 2-star reads. I feel bad, but it is another memoir / autobiography by Jessie Klein called You'll Grow Out of It. My review says it all. I tried to love this. The author's comedic background made this a very easy read, but it wasn't necessarily an enjoyable read. My main pet peeve was the lack of chronology to the chapters. Sometimes these thematic threads flipped from one life stage or relationship to another, which was really disorienting as a reader. And I can see the reasoning for this, being able to maintain a thematic flow, but the lack of the time scaling meant that it was really confusing. I also struggled to sometimes understand why the author had chosen to insert some themes over others or some stories over another. The disconnections between the chapters made me believe that this was perhaps written over a really extended period of time, which the author herself does admit to, but I think these probably should have been published as individual reflective essays rather than as a cohesive narrative. If the book had been pitched this way, as a collection of essays or reflections with comedic twists on personal experiences, then maybe the reader would know what they're walking into and not feel as disoriented. I think for this reason, I really didn't enjoy it, just because it was not what I was expecting, but not in a good way, if that makes sense. Next, we have my foray into crime fiction / mystery and thriller. I don't know if I've actually read this genre as an adult, but as you can see, it is the Millennium Trilogy, which is by Stieg Larsson. So that includes The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire, and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest. So these are very chunky reads. If you can see, I think they're around like 500 pages or more each. And so I'm really proud of myself for reading these in the last couple months. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is probably still my favorite. I did have elements of the second and third that I really enjoyed, and they do both have elements that get really gripping, like you cannot put the book down. But I think from a holistic perspective, I really enjoyed The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Now, the only other factor with that is that I did read this on holidays. So within, I think it was like a 4-day period, whereas these I read over maybe a month each. So maybe I didn't get the same appreciation that I did from consuming this at one point in time versus over multiple different moods and times in a month. So that could be a factor in why I enjoyed this one more than the other two. I did find the third one, which I've only recently finished, a bit of a slower burn. It was hard to see at the start just where the interest and the newness in this narrative was going to come. But then from about halfway through onwards, it definitely was gripping again. I think what I really enjoyed about these 3 books is that journalistic element to it all. So there is Millennium, which is the journalism company that Michael Blomkvist and Erica Berger work at. And I really enjoy that there is that nature to Larsson's narratives that are very journalistic. He's very factual. He just presents a lot of details and information to you. And so it is a writing style that takes a lot of getting used to, but I really appreciated it and enjoyed it. It's very different from what I usually read. I would love to see Larsson's notes in this series. It would be so extensive. The amount of character development, locations, scene setting, like wild, as well as all of the plot twists. Like there are a lot of things going on at any one point in time, and to be able to wrap them up into a trilogy is incredible. There are technically more books in the series, but the trilogy is kind of regarded as the main set of Larsson's influence, and then I understand other authors maybe carried forward some of his intentions with further books. There might be like even 10 or 11 I think I saw now, so I'm not too sure if I'm going to read those. I might in the future, but these I definitely recommend just even of themselves. Incredible. As I said, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was definitely my favorite from the trilogy, and I did write a review, so let me read that out to you. Gripping Woven with facts, journalistic accuracy and integrity, complex adult themes spanning religious cultish behaviours, criminal minds, financial empires, coercive control and romantic vulnerability. The novel is unpredictable in the best possible way, leaving you on the edge of your seat, waiting to see what new information will be discovered, what our characters may discern, what generational secrets may be brought into light. Highly recommend. I think what I love is that in the Millennium trilogy, we do see huge character growth and development in both Solander and in Blomkvist. The thing I love about Blomkvist is he's so loyal and he is really invested in his work, and he comes through with absolute mastermind, incredible stories. The thing that I don't like as much to him, which we see throughout all three of these books, is how he's sexually portrayed. He just seems to snap up women, and it doesn't really align to his personality. It doesn't really make sense that he doesn't have a loyal and stable relationship. I guess the closest we have to that is Erica and Blomkvist, because they obviously have some long-standing arrangement. But yeah, I've just found that that's really strange throughout. And as a result, he obviously ends up hurting a lot of people. So it's an odd one, and I don't know how to feel about that. Ultimately, I think the thing that I admire the most is that Larsson has so much material to keep us on our toes. Like, this is incredible amount of work that he has gone to. Character development, I'm so impressed as an author. I think I have a lot to learn from him. The next book is my second 2-star read. I hate giving such low stars to authors. This book was another book that I found on the Cloud Library. So my library had it under historical fiction. I don't know if I would call this historical fiction. I think I see why they believe that it was historical fiction, but it's definitely not as grounded in a particular historical moment as I would have expected it to be. That's probably why I gave it 2 stars as well. So let me read out my review. The beginning of this novel holds an intrigue that keeps you invested, with characters built, the environment painted vivid for the imagination, and a mystique found in the mere. But where this novel falls short is from midway through to the end, as the build and the suspense plateaus and there is a boredom in its place, an uncertainty as to where this novel is heading and what the purpose of continuing this journey with the characters is. I pushed through to see where it landed, but I did not feel a sense of satisfaction. That is definitely a great summary, because I very rarely get bored in books, but I definitely got bored in this book. And the reason that I did persevere instead of not finishing it is because I really did enjoy the start. I really felt that it was so atmospheric. It was very, very rich in its imagery, in its place. I had a sense of spatial awareness as well. It's like I was in this world. The atmosphere was incredible. The characters as well, they were intriguing enough. The mystery elements, the spiritual elements were interesting enough. I couldn't help comparing Mia with Rapture though. So both Mia and Rapture are technically historical fictions that have a Christian element, so early Christendom. Mia, I would say, is very unorthodox in its Christian elements. It has a lot of other spiritual systems at play. It has magic almost. So Mia actually was a book released in 2025, which I had no idea when I started reading it. The main fallback for me was the characters. I didn't really feel invested in any of the characters. I didn't particularly like them. Even our main character, I don't know what it was, but we were literally in her point of view for most of the book, yet the information we were getting about her was from other people. Like, we really didn't have too much of a backstory for her. So I felt like that was really lacking. Like, I would like to know more about my character. I would like to be invested in my character other than what I'm seeing in the here and now. Like, we need to have backstories to be invested as readers most of the time, unless they're very, very interesting. I don't know. Another 5-star read for me this year was Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. The tagline is "Be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did." I just found this incredibly simple. It is just such a beautiful, simplistic telling of the gospel. I think for new Christians, this would be such a great resource just because of how it frames the Christian life. And as the tagline says, it's just orienting our spiritual practices around Jesus. Jesus. I love that he looks at following Jesus as more of like an apprenticeship because of the nature in which a rabbi in those days did operate. So practicing the way is really about the spiritual practices and the spiritual disciplines and the spiritual rhythms that you can establish in your life. The 3 steps is what he expands on. So what does it look like to be with Jesus? What does it look like to become like him? And what does it look like to do as he did? What I will say I love about John Mark Comer, I listened to his sermons as well. This is the 2nd book that I've read of is his notes at the back end are incredible. And it's always encouraging to see when an author is very influenced by other authors. And I think when it does come to Christian nonfiction and spiritual books of any nature, there are so many who have come before us in the faith that it's important to cross-reference with those who have shared similar beliefs before us. And so John Mark Comer is very influenced by Dallas Willard. I was inspired because of his references to Willard many times to actually go and buy a couple of his books. And so those would definitely be on my 2026 reads. But yes, highly recommend, definitely gift it to your friends who are seeking or early on their faith journeys. Another one of my Christian nonfiction reads was Sacred Marriage. I've actually been reading this since the end of last year, so 2024. So it was one of those slow burn nonfiction reads. I only finished this yesterday, so I did forget to grab the hard copy. I do believe this is a great resource for anyone who is Christian and entering into marriage. The main question that Gary Thomas has is, what if God designed marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy? And I really like this premise and how he explores how marriage is sacred. Some of my notes on the novel as I was reading, I think he has a really beautiful perspective on marriage, and particularly the emphasis that he does have on sanctification and how marriage can refine us. He does have some good examples in there, so it is practical to an extent. I think the theology on marriage is also really sound. One of the quotes that I loved was, "Every wedding gives birth to a new history, a new beginning. The spiritual meaning of marriage is found in maintaining that history together." Apparently, in previous versions of this, he did have a problematic view of women. I can't comment on that because I don't have that version. I have the revised and updated version, so I didn't see anything problematic in here. But I did notice that there were reviews about that when I was researching this book, so just an FYI to make sure that you have the revised and updated version if you are interested in reading this book. Last but not least, we do have a top book, if not a draw for my top book, and it is The Lost Passenger by Frances Quinn. This was what I would call a perfect historical fiction. When I say I love historical fiction, this is what I mean. This book was just incredible. So we were looking at the Titanic, which I haven't actually read a historical fiction on the Titanic, so it was very new for me, and I really loved the angle that she took on this. Let me read out my review. The perfect historical fiction, complete with an intriguing plot idea and unfolding confidence in our main character, a unique perspective on the famous yet horrific events of the Titanic sinking, an enjoyable read for any lovers of borrowed histories and fictional daydreaming. I will say that I absolutely loved how Quinn set up our main character, Eleanor. I think she did it perfectly because there was a risk with the events that we may have not liked her because there was an ethical dilemma in her stealing another person's identity, but because of how Quinn set up Eleanor, it meant that we really were invested in her, we understood why she needed to steal someone else's identity, and so I think we could see past the ethical nature of it. And I think that's a sign of a really great character development when you are able to look past character flaws like that, or things that objectively would be morally right or wrong. All in all, I think that Quinn did an incredible job of exploring complex topics. I really loved that it didn't feel like it was trying too hard. It felt really natural. It was believable in large respects. And so I'm really excited to read more of Quinn. I've never read her before, and I've given her a 5-star for my first reading of her. So that brings me to the end of the summaries. That was a lot of books, so thank you for watching to the end if you have, even if you skipped through to some of the books that were of interest to you. If any of the books or the genres that I did talk about today are of interest to you, then you'll probably like my writing, because these are really just expressions of the type of writing that I like and the type of writing that influences my writing. So go and check out my blog, Abundance of Lovely, where you will see me exploring a lot of the philosophical concepts that might appear in the novels that I read. I'm also on GoodReads, so feel free to go and follow me on GoodReads if any of these books are of interest to you, or if you just would like to follow me on my reading journey in the future. The thing I will say about books in general to keep in mind when you are watching other people's vlogs or considering your own tastes and approaches to books, is that the mood and the mental state that you are in really does affect your ability to enjoy a book. So keep that in mind. There might be a season where you're not ready or able to enjoy a book, but it might be that in a later season you are. So bear that in mind and always approach things with a curiosity and an openness. Otherwise, stay tuned for more vlogs and blogs on Abundance of Lovely soon.